My name is Brianna Glover, and this is my presentation on the Roman household and the gender roles within Rome. The orientation of a Roman family was centered around the male head of the household, and they referred to them as paterfamilias, whom also have paternal power over the family, while the women's role was typically just to take care of and manage the household. In regards to society, the power of the male in the household was seen in the power of politicians in Rome, as well as magistrates, and altogether, the family as a whole worked to achieve prosperity and a higher social status. Paterfamilia's role, the male head of the household, he had full authority and power and say over his whole family. He had power of life and death over members of the family, also known as paternal power. Was the rule maker of the house and the family and the judge of the family. So whatever he saw to be fit went. Like he just had total control over it, what any of the members of the family did. He could sell his dependents into bondage if he wanted to. He could destroy their own property, and his goal is to promote the welfare of the family as well as to promote their social status and social class. He is the primary provider, and respect was expected from the family members, from his sons, daughters, his wife, and good behavior was sometimes rewarded to his family. The wives' role, the mother's role, they managed and took care of the household. They were married very young. Sometimes this would even be before puberty, but this wasn't very often. And this was to ensure their virginity. Upper-class women sometimes studied philosophy, literature. They were offered this opportunity where lower-class women typically weren't. They were seen as fragile and frail within the Roman society. Marriages between the wealthy classes was viewed as more of a business arrangement and less than like a marriage among two individuals. Women have to be educated enough to teach their own children in the household. They oversaw family provisions and any slaves that the family had. They looked after the children, but women also could not act in their own interests in terms of laws and finances. A male was required to do this for them, and women were seen to have weak judgment. They had no say or role in any political decisions or anything regarding politics. We obviously don't see things like this in present time, but during this, Romans, their culture and just their society structure, this worked very well for them, and it was seen as very normal, and women seemed okay with doing so, because this was the role that they were always taught to do. Children's role. Children always were educated in the home, and wealthy families were able to, if they wanted to, later on, enroll their children in grammar schools. Typically, these grammar schools only ran until the child was about 12 years of age, and a child's life is decided by what level of society they were born into. So if someone from the working class, a child was born into the working class, typically that's what their life is going to be all throughout adulthood. If they're born into the higher classes, wealthy class, they have to work for it, but that is what they are going to maintain throughout their adulthood. And children from the working class had to begin working at a young age because this extra income that they could bring in was crucial for their family because they did not make very much money. These children also didn't have much education. The education they would get was only enough to ensure that they would be able to get employment. All children were under control of their fathers, even as adults throughout adulthood, and this was until their father's death. So men, fathers, husbands in Rome had significant power over their whole family's lives, their whole lives, their wives' lives, the day they marry them until they die, and their children's lives until the fathers die themselves. men in Rome held a lot of power. Sons in Rome, within a Roman household, when they were around 15 years of age, they wore toga virilis, which was the toga of manhood. It was a white toga that represented them entering manhood as well as their enrollment as citizens. Some boys were given the choice of civil or a military career if their family was prominent enough to offer them this choice. A son inherits their father's debts and their father's property. Once doing this, they are responsible for the family's prosperity and the family's reputation. The daughters within a Roman household typically were married between the ages of 14 and 18. This is not something that we see today, almost never. But again, this was something seen fit in their society and within their culture, and it was normal. And women typically, there wasn't any kickback on that. They were married off to much older men, and they were married at this young age to these men to ensure sexual purity. And this was so that the husbands would not be embarrassed if their wives were not pure before being married to them. But this young age was also so that the husbands were able to control their wives easier because they were younger. It's easier to influence them, to teach them things, teach them opinions that aren't theirs, just things such as that. They're controlled much easier at that age because they don't know as much. Once married, they do become property of their husbands, and when they get married, they are brought dowry. The husbands they bring dowry from their father to give to their husbands, which is money for marrying them. But later on, if they were to get divorced, the husband has to give this money back. Daughters, throughout their whole lives, young girls were trained and they were taught to be mothers and wives because this was a role they were going to take on. So essentially, they were taught by their mothers to be these things who were those things to them. They're taught how to act properly, manners, politeness, how to dress, how to perceive themselves in public, things just like that. They were protected by their brothers, protected from harm. This was one of the brothers, I guess you could say roles. They were very protective over their sisters. And in their father's eyes, they were also very valued because they were descendants of his blood. They're going to keep his bloodline going. So the Roman family's impact and their roles within society, the husband's work contributed to the success of his family. Women, their work within the household were efforts towards this same goal, because the goal within Rome was always to achieve as high of a social class as you can. Families worked together to achieve a higher status in society, meaning the daughters and the sons did as well. This ties into a big part of reputation depended on the training and the education of the children, because how they act in public is something that greatly affected their social status as well. How the family perceived themselves, how they acted in general publicly was very important to their social status. And social status was also affected by a husband's political position, if he had one. Any men within Rome that held a political position of any kind, a higher social status came along with that.